You ready, Philip?
Yeah.
Do you want this podium?
Yeah, I'll use it first.
Okay.
I'll probably drag a chair up there when I actually tell
All
the story.
right.
Howdy, folks. I was here a few months ago, I think. You might remember me. I'm a consumer. Although I went to a conference recently, and I think the politically correct term now is a person with lived experience. Although I have problems with that because isn't everyone in the world a person with lived experience? So how does that apply to just people who happen to have a medical condition or something? Because I've got lived experience and everybody on the street's got lived experience. So I don't see how that differentiates me from anybody else. I don't quite understand how that term has any meaning. So, whatever. Anyway, the conference I went to, though, was very encouraging because it was called the Trauma Informed Conference. It was a state-sponsored conference. And the state has finally realized that the people in their care have been through trauma and that we ought to treat them that way. That they're human beings who've been through a lot of bad stuff and that we ought to treat them as though they have. And the really encouraging thing that I got from the conference was not just that the professionals have completely bought into that and they have put together some very good programs in line with that philosophy and tested them out. And the field programs that they've tested out have been amazingly wonderful. But that I heard professionals, one after another, say, I am willing to stand up to the bean counters and the politicians and say we have to do it this way from now on. That was the most encouraging thing I heard at the whole conference. Over and over again I heard them say. So maybe there's some hope. Anyway, I also met a lady there from the Austin Child Guidance Center, and I found out that they were planning also a trauma-informed care conference, and they were putting out a bid for proposals. So I put together a proposal because I'm a therapeutic storyteller. So I'm going to tell you a story about my telling a story about a story. That's really what it is, actually. And what happened to a little girl. Let me do that. So, the name of the story is The Little Boy Who Couldn't Sit Still. And I found it in a wonderful book that's called The Healing Heart Families. It's a collection of healing stories or therapeutic stories. And the storyteller that wrote it down said that he actually watched what is contained in the story happen. So he's retelling a story that he saw actually happen. So there was a little boy who couldn't sit still. He wanted to, but he'd get these colors inside of him, and they just had to come out. And when they came out, he just got so excited, he just had to jump up and down and move around and reach for those colors, which would have been just fine. But his mother was a very nervous woman. And every time she did that, especially when he did it in public, she would get very upset with him. And she would reach out and grab him and she would ground him. And if he made a scene, she would get embarrassed And she would tell him, I'm not taking you out anymore if you do that again. And so pretty much he stayed at home most of the time with his mother. But then he saw a flyer at the library, and it said that the dinosaur storyteller was coming to tell a story. Now, before I go on with the rest of the story, I have to tell you, I told this story many times in the child unit at Austin State Hospital. And so I told it one night to a group of kids in the unit for the 4 to 12-year-olds. And one of the kids that I had there was a little 4-year-old girl. She sat right there at my feet listening. And this little 4-year-old girl came into us babbling echolalic speech, which is just basically just babbling meaningless words. She'd been through a trauma. She'd been through abuse. It was physical, also sexual, unfortunately. So anyway, in the story, he went to his mother and said, I have to go hear the dinosaur storyteller. And of course she said she would have none of it because he would get so excited and he would jump up and down and he would make a scene and he would embarrass her. But he was determined that he had to go hear that dinosaur storyteller because dinosaurs were his favorite thing in the whole world. So he kept after her for days and days about going to see the dinosaur storyteller at the library. And finally, he wore her down, and she said, okay, but you make one sound while listening to the dinosaur storyteller, and I am taking you home immediately. Okay, fine, anything. So they went under those terms. And when they got to the room in the library where the dinosaur storyteller was on the stage, they had already set up, and there was a group of children sitting in front of the stage, and his mother steered him away from that group of children and put him as far away from that group of children as she could so that she could grab him and get him out of there as quickly as possible if necessary. So he kept himself contained pretty well for the first few minutes of this dinosaur storyteller story. Then he looked around and he noticed that as far away from the group as he was on one side of the room, there was a little girl on the other side of the room, just that far away from the group, on the other side of the room. And she had on a little cap. And then he noticed that there was this kind of movement and twittering going on in the group. And then he noticed one little boy starting to edge out away from the edge of the group. And then he realized what was happening. And he saw that little boy break away from the group and to run toward the little girl. And he began to run toward the little girl too. And he tried to intercept that little boy, but he got there just too late. And that little boy went to the little girl and he pulled her cap off of her head, and she was bald. And the little girl put her hands over her head, and she put her head down into her lap. And the little boy who couldn't sit still, he grabbed that little boy and tackled him to the ground. And he wrested that little cap from the little boy's hands. And he ran over to the little girl, and somehow he knew that she needed to put it back on herself. So he presented it to her like her crown. And she gratefully accepted it with a hand. And she put that little cap back on her own head. And just that moment, the little boy's mother's hand clamped on the back of his neck. and wrenched him up and tucked him under her arm and carried him toward the door, flat as a board, out of the room. But the little girl ran around the other direction and met her at the door and stood in the doorway and blocked her way. And she held her hand up and she said, "Stop! Put him down!" And his mother put him down. And the little girl took him by the hand and she said to the mother, "We're going back to listen to the dinosaur storyteller. You can sit where you like." And the mother slunk back to a chair in the last row with her head down. And the little girl and the little boy, they went back and they sat down right back, smack dab in the middle of the children. And the dinosaur storyteller began her story again. And as she did, the little girl opened her hand, and in it was a little toy dinosaur. And she said to the little boy, "Take it. I take it with me to the hospital for my treatments. It helps me with them. I want you to have it." The little boy took it. And just then the dinosaur storyteller started to tell a new story about two little dinosaurs who were lost, but who found each other by giving away to each other the thing that was most precious to each other. And so they found themselves and each other. And the little boy felt his colors welling up in his heart, and they came bursting out of the top of his head. And he started jumping up and down and grabbing at the colors coming out of the top of his head. And the little girl looked up at them and pulled her cap back just a little to see them better. So, of course, at this point, I'm at the end of the story. So I do what a storyteller does, of course. I pause and I sit back in my chair. We're dramatic like that. And this 4-year-old at my feet stands bolt upright, sticks her chest out, sticks her chin out, and says, remember, this is the child who speaks in echolalic babble, says, "And that's me," and turns on her heel and walks to her room and closes the door behind her. Well, folks, the Austin Child Guidance Center conference didn't take my proposal, but the storytelling festivals in March, and I'm going to send them the proposal. So I hopefully